Welcome to the Speaking of Women's Health podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Holly Thacker, the Director of National Speaking of Women's Health. And I am so excited to be back in the Sunflower House today and joining us for one of the last episodes of Season 1 is a very important and somber topic about end of life. And joining us in the Sunflower House for this special episode is Dr. Silvia Perez-Protto. And Dr. Perez-Protto is a staff physician. She's one of my colleagues, but she's in the intensive care and resuscitation department at the Anesthesia Institute at Cleveland Clinic. She's also an associate professor of anesthesiology at the Cleveland Clinic Lerner College of Medicine. And she's the medical director of the End of Life Center at the Office of Safety, Quality, and Patient Experience. And she is so interesting and fascinating and talented. She has specifically developed advanced care planning program at the Cleveland Clinic, which we're going to talk about in depth. And she has had the goal of goal concordant care. She led the implementation of the pause, not anything about menopause, but to honor the person who dies at the hospital and the care provided by that hospital team. And she also co-created Death Over Dinner for healthcare. I know that sounds a little bit strange and we're past the Halloween season, but it is so important to plan for a healthy death. And she also is going to talk to us about the Pause app that she developed to foster caregiving and caregiver resilience related to the end of life care. Welcome, Dr. Silvia Perez-Protto.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for your words. I'm very honored to be here.
Well, we are so excited to have you as a guest on the Sunflower Women's Health podcast to talk about advanced care planning and advanced directives. And several years ago, you did a wonderful column for us on speakingofwomenshealth.com. But as we start off this very important and somewhat somber discussion, but it's so important for the whole entire circle of life. Tell us more about your role in advanced care planning and why did you decide to go into this field and develop this so fully?
Well, I'm a critical care physician, as you said, and 20% of the people in the United States die during or after an ICU admission. So even though you start as an intensivist to save patients,
you said 20%.
Actually you develop, one every 5 people in the United States has been admitted or during or after an ICU admission die. So it's part of our role as intensivists to understand death and dying as part of our role to help patients to navigate that time, and their families. So that's why I am in this field. And I come from another country. As you see with my accent, I'm from Uruguay, South America. And back home, death and dying is more part of our life cycle. It's something that usually people talk about. And I grew up talking about that in my family and the dinner table, right? And here, I was sometimes surprised how people didn't, I was bringing some discussions about prognosis, and there were all surprises. And I say, people need to talk about this as a part of a life cycle, as a natural act,
Yes, it is a natural part of the life cycle. Certainly my goal in the Center for Specialized Women's Health is to help improve longevity and quality of life. But no matter how healthy one is and how much everybody does the right thing, eventually we are all going to pass on. You told me a very touching story when I first met you about your dad. Do you want to share that with our listeners?
Yeah, so my dad was a physician, and I remember we were in a very small town, So he was an anesthesiologist during the day, and then he has his office, and then he used to go to see patients at their homes. So sometimes he picks us up, and then we went with him, and some patients and families invited us to, eat cookies while my father was taking care of them. And one day he said, I want to warn you, so-and-so passed, so he died, so he's not going to be there. We are going to only say hi to the wife because she is grieving that her husband died. And so that I grew up seeing these things. And that time there were no billing or anything, so we went there and saw the family only to say hi, totally different approach like today. I think that shaped what I am now. And he always say how important is dignity at the end of life. So these are the concepts I grew up with, and this is what I want for my patients.
Wow. So you really are your father's daughter. That is just so wonderful. And one of our earlier podcasts, when I talked with an attorney about divorce and family law, one of the things that did come up is having papers in order and finances in order. And we touched just a little bit about advanced care planning. But tell our listeners, Doctor, what specifically is advanced care planning?
Yes, so that's a great question. So advanced care planning is a process, right? And changes over time. It's basically understand your goals, how you want to live up to the end. So first of all, this conversation is about life, how you want to live. So if we say, how we want to die, that's another approach to the same topic, right? Advanced care planning includes first, who is going to make decisions for you if you are not able to. And this is something important for anyone because anyone can have an accident, or a stroke or anytime. Even the healthiest person can be diving and have an accident, right? So it's important to know who's going to make decisions for you if you are unable to. And that person could be in the order in Ohio, in the state you are, or could be outside, right, of that order. So if the best is to have a document saying who is the first person and the second and the third. And sometimes even if you have 5 kids and you know that one is going to take your wishes up to the end and another is not going to be able to do it, and it's not a manifestation of love to choose one over the other. It's like who is going to be the best one for healthcare, and perhaps another kid is best for the finances, right? So the first step is stating who is going to speak for you. I recommend to have a document that is the healthcare power of attorney.
Healthcare power of attorney.
Yes, and be in the chart. So you have to bring the document to the hospital. We have many, many ways to do it, and I can share a website where all this is explained. So it's in the chart. So when we have a problem, we know exactly who to talk to. And then for patients that are seriously ill with a diagnosis that decreases your expectancy of life, like says 6 months, 1 year, those patients need goals of care conversations. And these are conversations that we talk what matters most to you. And that's why it's important to do it often, because your goals change, right? As your disease process progresses, you may change your goals. So that's why it's a process. So what matters most to you? What are your fears, your worries? And then we can deliver a care that is aligned to your wishes. And then, of course, we talk about what are your wishes in an emergency. If you are weak and with a terminal diagnosis, if the heart stops, do we want a natural death, or we want to do chest compressions, intubation, go to the machine even when it's futile and it's not going to help? And again, there's patients that say, I want everything done. And we have to respect those decisions, But again, when doctors in the state of Ohio, we feel that they are futile and it's against the standards, and we are not going to help, we are going to damage the body. We even, two physicians, we can say we will not offer CPR or resuscitation maneuvers. We are going to allow a natural death, and we can talk about it and explain why we think that this is the best approach. So understanding death as a natural part of our life cycle is crucial.
Very crucial. So you are listening to the Speaking of Women's Health podcast, and I'm your host, Dr. Holly Thacker, the Executive Director of Speaking of Women's Health. And we are joined by a physician, Dr. Silvia Perez-Protto, who specializes in the last stages of life, which can, of course, unfortunately happen at any time. None of us can predict the future. Can you tell us, Doctor, you talked about a healthcare power of attorney, which is important to name. I know as soon as my 3 sons turned 18, on the day they turned 18, they filled out their paperwork, because once they're 18, they're an illegal adult.
Yes.
Doesn't matter that you're their mom. And they signed
Yes.
it. Tell us what the living will is.
Yes. So the living will is a document that says, in the case I am terminally ill by 2 physicians or permanently unconscious, and I don't have capacity to share my wishes, I don't want to be connected with machines. I want to die naturally. And please, doctor, place a DNR order. Do not resuscitate order. So basically, the living will applies in very small population. You need to have a patient that is terminally ill. There's nothing else to do in order to extend the life. And 2 physicians should sign that document. It's very important, that document, in cases, for example, with no surrogate. There's no family, there's no document. This patient is admitted, it's a terminal condition. In these cases, if we don't have a living will, we have to keep them on the machines until the body, with time, it stops and working. But the problem is that we at the ICU are very good today with all the machines and support we have. So many terminal patients may be alive for a long time with no meaningful recovery, no meaningful life. So the living will assures us to not to be kept on machines if we are terminal and we are not able to speak. Mm-hmm. And that helps families, because if we have a document, it's helping the family sometimes to make the decision to say, yes, let's allow a natural death. And this is another thing that I like to say to my families. Instead of saying, do not resuscitate, it's allow a natural death. This is what it is.
That sounds so much better. I'm
yes.
thinking of one situation of a good dear friend who had a terminal diagnosis and had, the advance directives, healthcare power of attorney, had the living will, including the natural, wanting a natural death. And when they were hospitalized, it got revoked because this person who was dying had air hunger, which of course we know how to treat to make someone comfortable and peaceful. And so he then revoked the do not resuscitate, and it was like on, off. And it just seemed like it was not a good death. And just like we want
yes.
good births for moms who are bringing
yes.
babies into the world, sometimes it can be a little rocky. It's not always as according to the birth plan. It's the same thing with the end of life. But are things better nowadays that people are given the comfort care so they're not so uncomfortable and air hungry that they say, oh no, do everything and intubate and put me on the machines?
Yes. So actually we have many teams working in these cases, right? In the ICU, we have the training to make sure the patient is comfortable with no shortness of breath, air hunger, anxiety. So we have medications to help them. And if they survive enough, we can even send them to hospice or to the regular nurse floor with palliative care and or hospice care. And the goal changed. We want the patient to be as much as in peace as possible, connecting with the family if possible. And we invite the families to celebrate life, to tell us stories about the patient. And then we have a lot of people that helps us, like spiritual care, healing services, music therapy. We can even bring their pets. And, we tried everything that matters most to this person, right? And this is the question I love to use. What matters most to you? And that is a very open-ended question that unpacks a lot. And you can find, our goal is to make sure that time is meaningful.
Very important.
So the goal is not always more treatment, more surgeries, more time. Sometimes patients really want this time of peace, this time. And that's why it's so important for us to be honest with prognosis so they can prepare for that time realistically, right? And, say goodbye, forgive someone, ask for forgiveness. I don't know. Life is complicated, right? And it's the time of the patient. It's not our time.
Now, every time I meet a new patient in the Center for Specialized Women's Health, I always give them a folder with information about the practice and people on the team and who the scheduler to call. And I always include information about healthcare power of attorney, living will, and advanced directives. And some people are just taken aback because they're not expecting that. But I thought, we're planning for the rest of your life, and we need to plan for the whole entire life cycle. How does one start on completing their advanced directives? I mean, I certainly prompt all my patients, but I know not everyone is necessarily seeing a physician or a healthcare clinician that's having these discussions with them.
We'll be back after a quick break.
Hey, quick question for you. Are you someone who wants to be fit, healthy, and happy? And what if I told you could get your dream body by simply just listening to a podcast? I'm Josh.
And I'm KG, and we're the hosts of the Fit, Healthy, and Happy podcast.
Listen, we get it. Fitness isn't easy. Carbs, no carbs.
Just stop, okay? It doesn't have to be that complicated. And that's why we made this podcast. We get straight to the facts so you can become your best you.
So the way to check us out is click the link in the show notes or search Fit, Healthy, and Happy podcast on any of the major podcast platforms. We'll see you soon.
Yes, and the documents are pretty complex. It's 12 pages long, and sometimes it's hard to understand. So I think you can find us in the website. I will share with you. There are resources for patients that we have guides on. Page 1 is this, page 2 is this, so you can do it yourself. And could be witnessed by 2 people that are not related to you by blood or by marriage or by adoption. So your neighbor can be a witness. And then it's going with 2 witnesses or a notary, but you don't need a notary. And also the clinic, social workers, spiritual care are trained to help patients to complete the documents. And more than the document, I would say the next step is to have the conversation. And that's another tricky thing, right? Because sometimes I know who's the person, right, chosen by the patient. And then they say, we never talk about this. I don't know what he or she would have wanted. So, and again, I will tell my story. My dad passed away years ago. So death, he was super young when he died. So death is a pretty difficult topic to bring up sometimes. But I wanted to know what my mom would have wanted if something happens to her. And then one day I went walking in the beach with her and I started asking questions. And even me being a physician was kind of difficult. I didn't know exactly what to ask and got a little tricky. And then I changed topics. And I found a guy that I always offer to my families of my patients. And I use it with my mom later. and the name is The Conversation Project. And this is a guide with questions that are validated by research, that are questions to share with people when we are healthy, right? And you know, in my house, my husband and my daughter were always, you're always talking about this and that. And one day I wanted to have the conversation and they didn't want to have it. So I wrote everything in one day and sent it out. It was a Tuesday night in a call. I was on call and I wrote everything. I said, Mom, are you crazy? You're sending me a Tuesday night. But then COVID hit. And my husband, we have been married for 30 years. He said that it was the time that he never saw me so stressed and so afraid of going to the ICU. So one day we were almost to go to bed and he said, what exactly you want if something happens to you? And I say, seriously? So I say, Pablo, let's do death over dinners. Let's do it. So we actually connected.
What is death over dinner for healthcare?
Yes. So actually,
it's not some new restaurant, I take.
Death over dinner. I know. So Death over dinner started years ago for friends and families to have this discussion about death and dying and how you want to die and what your legacy would be, and to think about that and share it with your loved ones, right? So it started for families and friends, and this is what I invited him to do. And so we did the first online death over dinner, because usually it's in a table of 6 or 8 people breaking bread that connects to your core, right? Sharing a dinner, sharing a meal, answering those questions. It's a way to connect with others and open up. And that was brought by Michael Hebb, that is the creator of Death Over Dinner. And he came to the Empathy Summit years ago that the clinic used to offer, host. And then we said, oh my God, we need to do it for healthcare teams. So basically, I wanted to take us from the hospital, right? Without our badges that says, I'm the doctor, I'm the nurse, I'm the respiratory therapist, right? As people, but in teams, right? In multidisciplinary teams. And share our feelings regarding end of life and death and dying. Because it's hard for us, Sometimes if you have a patient for a long time and that patient starts having issues and then die, you miss your patients, right? Or for us in the ICU, you meet this family in a very stressful situation for 1 week and then the patient die, right? Like, even in different situations means different things to us, but it's hard. No, we have these feelings, and sometimes patients remind us of our own families or our previous experiences. So this is a way where the surgeon, the anesthesiologist, the consultant, the internal medicine, the nurse, we all come together as people, not from our roles, and share. At the beginning of the dinner, we turn on a light, like a candle, to honor someone that we lost. And it was amazing to me to see a surgeon talked about the patient. The first thing he did was to talk about the patient. So it's like, wow, like most of us, we talk about our parents or our grandparents, or that person brought a patient. So it was eye-opening for me, because I never saw that part from him, So I think it's a way, and then we have questions. So while we have dinner, we answer those questions. And then at the end, we all do a pause to honor everybody we honor that night. And we honor the team work for all these patients that we were talking about at the end. So so we close with a pause. And this is what is Death Over Dinner for healthcare.
Wow. So do you encourage everyone to do this individually, or for primarily healthcare workers, or anyone who's interested in this process?
Yes. So if you put death over dinners, there are many versions. So there are death over dinners even for Jewish people, for Brazilian people. There's one in Brazilian for Brazilian culture. It's a huge movement there. There's one for families and friends, and then the healthcare one is for healthcare teams. So the questions are kind of different. And at the beginning, you go and choose things. You can choose a podcast, you can choose a reading, and then at the end brings you questions that you're going to use during the dinner. So you can organize your own dinner.
Yeah, that is so important to do. Just the other day, I had a wedding anniversary, and so my husband had my wedding rings because I had lost, one of my side diamonds doing some heavy work. So he had it fixed and, brought it back to me. And I had my granddaughter Artemis on my lap. And I said, oh, one day you'll probably have some of these rings. Which one would you like? So she picked the biggest one. And then she said, and my little sister Beatrice can have this one. And I thought, okay, this was a good discussion to start to have. And my son said, oh, that's so morbid. You're being so morbid. It's like, no. I mean, most likely I hope to predecease my children and grandchildren.
Exactly. Yes.
And I think that some people think that they either don't want to deal with it at all, or they only deal with certain aspects. Like when I'll ask patients, they'll be, oh, yes, I have a lawyer. I've dealt with all the financial stuff. And certainly the financial things are very important, having an executor. Mm-hmm. And, do you need a codicil to your will? And are you having trust? I mean, so certainly all of that's important. But I always say, well, we're interested in the health aspects and how you want to be cared for. So it really is a whole entire comprehensive process that we all need to face once you're 18.
We'll be back after a quick break.
Have you ever experienced fitness failure? You set a goal to exercise, you're all excited, and then you're not. Hi, I'm Dave. I host the daily 10-minute podcast, Walking is Fitness. Instead of an exercise goal, I talk about making a fitness promise. And every day you keep that promise, you add another link to a growing fitness chain. This is a podcast of action. You'll create a fitness habit, which eventually becomes fitness momentum, and then on to all kinds of good stuff. Check it out. Walking is Fitness, and let's take a daily 10-minute walk together.
And also organ donation, right? I always think I want to die in a way that I can be a donor. I always say that because from death you give life, right?
Yes.
So part of the discussions, and that's why the discussion should be early. Like, anyone can have an accident, right? So, and if you have an accident, you have high likelihood to be a donor and to be healthy, to save many lives, right? Up to 8 lives we can save, and many, many more, improving quality of life. So why we don't talk about this, right? And then I always say cremation, and then to the Atlantic Ocean. But I told them, don't go to Uruguay. It's too much. You can go any part of the Atlantic.
But it has to be the Atlantic Ocean for you, right? Not the Pacific.
Atlantic, yes. Yeah, I was born in the Atlantic.
But that whole thing about organ donation and giving life is so important. And on our website, Heather McKessa, who runs Life Bank in charge of organ donation, she's done a wonderful column. And she was highlighting to me that the group of millennial parents, many of them when they're diagnosed and carrying a baby with a fatal condition, they don't choose to terminate the pregnancy. They carry the pregnancy, even though they know that the baby may not have a brain or may have something that will not allow life, but they give life.
It's
through organ donation, because little babies need organs too.
Yes. So this was part of my story as an intensivist. When I was 24 years old, I was in the ICU, and this patient came with a procedure in the brain in the right side, and she was fine, and she needed the left side. And she said, I don't want to have it. I want to go home and have Christmas with my daughter that's 8, and then I will come back next month. And then what happened in January, I received her in brain death because she bled after the second procedure. And back home at that time, we have a document that was pink saying that you wanted to be a donor, and she had 3 documents signed. So I said, oh my God, this is the last thing I can do for her, is to make sure she's a donor. And in that time, donation gave meaning to death for me as a 24-year-old intensivist at that time. And since then, I've been involved in organ donation as well. So everything ties, right? And how we want to live, how we want to die, and what we want to be after, how we want to do it, right?
Absolutely. So you're listening to the Speaking of Women's Health podcast, and we are talking about end-of-life decisions, which are all part of our mission, being strong, being healthy, and being in charge, because it is the circle of life. And we're talking with expert physician and intensivist anesthesiologist, Dr. Silvia Perez-Protto. And you, Dr. Perez-Protto, helped create the Pause app. Can you talk to us about how this app works and how we might get it?
Yes. So the pause was invented by Jonathan Bartels in Virginia, in the University of Virginia. He was a nurse in the ED, and one day he was involved in the resuscitation of a patient very young after a trauma, and they couldn't save him. And then one started preparing the body, another started going to the talk to the family, cleaning up the room, and then he said, stop, let's pause. Let's honor this person, that we help him, we try to help him. Let's honor, he was loved, he was somebody loved others, and let's honor us as a team and the care we provided to him. And he did a pause, and then he said, thank you. And it was transformational. So since then, when we found out that, because a fellow came to the clinic and did that and was amazing for the nurses, so they came to me and say, Silvia, we need to do this at the clinic. So I connected with him and say, hey, every time I talk about the pause, I will say that we didn't invent it, it came from you. And then we, as a Cleveland Clinic way, we did a pilot, we got feedback and this and that until we had a script that is very, very plain words, because we don't want any religion, anything there. It's only honor the person, honor the team, and stop in community, but in silence. So each person lives it as they want, as they feel, but it's in community, it's all together. So, and then of course, when you start doing it, you get used to the words and everything, but at the beginning it's hard. So we wanted to have something that is available. So we created the Pause app, and you can find it is free. And we have the script in many, many languages. So if the family doesn't speak English, yes. So if the family doesn't speak English, we explain to them that we are going to do that. We ask permission. And we show what we say in their own language. So they are sure there's no religion, anything there. And I have only one family who asked me not to do that because they wanted to have their own celebration. So our team went to the nurse room, and then we did it there without the patient. But usually families stay with us, they are with us, and they love it. So, and it's a way for us to close, that relationship that sometimes it was very short and intense, and sometimes was longer. But it's a way to do it together.
And so people can go on like their Apple iTunes store and just download the Pause for free. So it's kind of like a healthcare-focused, team-focused, non-denominational closure. And certainly that doesn't preclude other people from their own religious or spiritual end of life or
Yes.
last rites, which, many people will get as their last, sacrament, end of life. And certainly
Yes.
cultures, religions, ages, backgrounds. I mean, we respect whatever is how that person and their family want to mark and celebrate their death and their life.
So one of the things interesting that happened, because we did this for the care team, right? In the ICU, in the floor, in the ED, in the emergency room. But one time, somebody from IT had a colleague that died, and they were very unsettled. And this manager brought everybody together, say, hey, let's do a pause to honor so and so. And since then, end up happening in M&Ms when we discuss cases. Some people say, okay, let's do a pause about the patient, or in quality events, they do the pause. And then they end up doing it in the executive team. And during the pandemic was quite important, because executive team were more about, preparing for the surge. And but every Monday, when they name everybody that died Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and they name all the patients who died in the enterprise, and they do the pause, it was coming to reality that these numbers were people with names. So since then, they do it every day in Huddle 6. Executive team have all the names of the people who died the day before, and they honor everybody with that pause. And the Joint Commission was here and found that as one of the 10 most impactful changes at the clinic. So, yes, it's incredible how a little act can have so much reach,
Yes. So tell us a little bit about yourself personally, because you're still full of life and living life very full. You're the mom of 2 daughters, right?
Yes, I have a 23-year-old and a 12-year-old.
Well, that's quite a span.
Yes, well, I have some miscarriages, so some doctors like in your field helped me a lot, and I decided that I will stop studying and getting bored, and I started dancing flamenco again last year. So I'm very
Wonderful.
excited.
That's great.
Yes,
You're a dancer.
yes. So there's a group of Abre Paso is the name, and I'm a board member of the of this organization, non-for-profit, to to create community through the art of dancing. It's a Spanish dancing. Is very difficult, so I'm preventing Alzheimer's.
That's true.
Because
It does
you
help
have to
your
think
brain.
about a lot.
Yes. You'll have to send us some
Yes.
video clips, and we'll.
So I think it's my name.
Yes, please send me a video clip of your dance. You
Oh,
dancing, because
okay.
I'll put it up on our social media on Speaking of Women's Health, because people can follow us, not just the podcast. So if you're listening to this podcast on any place you listen to podcasts, just hit follow or subscribe, because it's free.
Oh, that's
But
wonderful.
we're on Facebook and LinkedIn and Pinterest and X, which is formerly known as Twitter. So we can put that up. I'm sure our followers would love to see you dancing. That is like so wonderful. And you've also had leadership roles.
Well, I'm not sure I'm ready. I'm not sure if I'm ready to be in the.
Just a little clip. I'm sure you're ready. So
I will see.
You've also been involved in leadership roles for the Women's Professional Staff Affairs as well. So you have the respect of all your colleagues.
Oh, yes. So, well, this is part of my goal of lifting others while I lead. So I had the honor to represent the women professional staff at the clinic. Yes, I'm humbled by that. And yes, it's something that it's important to me to help others while I'm leading. So,
well, we're so proud of you, and this has been so helpful. In wrap up, Doctor, any final tips that people need to keep in mind, that we all need to keep in mind in terms of planning our end of life?
Yeah, I would say that if you live your life at fullest, we want to live up to the end at fullest. So we need to live it in our own terms. So it's important to share those wishes, to think about it, reflect, and then share that with our loved ones and with our care teams so we can have the best experience at the end.
I was recently visiting the grave site of one of my friends who sadly got dementia during the pandemic, and it rapidly progressed, and she died. And so I was going there, and I ran into her husband because it was the first time he was going to visit the headstone. It was beautiful. And he was there with his sister, whose husband had died. And they gave some really good advice to me and my husband. They said, plan your own funeral, get your own headstone, because your children will either spend way too much money that you wouldn't want your money to have been spent on, or they'll spend way too little. And I thought, okay, I've got some penny pinching sons. So that was really good advice, because it made, my husband and I think we need to plan all this out and pay for it. And, so the whole shebang, of course, the healthcare
Yes.
part and who's going to speak for you and what are your own personal goals and what you want done, what you don't want done. That is, like you said, living to the fullest to the very end. But there are factors afterwards that can make it very difficult on the loved ones. Like if your paperwork is not in order and you don't have an executor and you haven't decided where you want things to go.
Yes.
That is so important. So we're going to put information about the pause and how people can reach you and links to your column in our show notes. So thank you so much, Doctor, for joining us at the end of our first season about end of life, which is so important to being strong and being healthy and being in charge up to the very end. And I'd like to thank all of our listeners for joining us. And if you've enjoyed this podcast, you can give us a 5-star rating, share it with your friends, share it with your family. Use this as a point in time to start to talk about this. And it's free to subscribe. And if you want to donate to our nonprofit, speakingofwomenshealth.com, we would much appreciate it. And please follow us wherever you listen to your podcast, Apple Podcasts, Google, Spotify, iHeartRadio. And I'll look forward to joining you in the Sunflower House next year in season 2.